Their defense is a joke.
What it really comes down to is I would love to have either of them.
They don't have a prayer in their secondary. They have nothing.
So you're saying just don't draft Blunt?
I'm saying don't draft Blunt.
He was unbelievably efficient last year.
You know that they use their running backs in the passing game a ton.
I'm drafting him tonight.
That's Team Huevos. Huevos gigantes.
Welcome into the FantasyPros Football Podcast. My name is Kyle Yates, and I am your host. I'm joined, as always, by Mike Tagliere. You can find us on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, the combine is over, man. Did you make it through?
I did. I made it through. I also had like a breather in between because my son loves monster trucks, as everybody knows. And so we got to go see Monster Jam, and then I came back home and I watched my recorded combine on Saturday and watched it Sunday. And honestly, I'm just excited that we have something else to talk about, that we have. It's almost like new information, right? And then we're going to get past this, and then we're going to have free agency coming up in the middle of this month. And it's like, this is an exciting time because we've been kind of in a lull, I would say, over the past month, just watching college film and the same things over and over. So I am definitely ready to talk about something new.
Yeah, for sure. And it's always important to look back over these events that we go through and to analyze them and kind of glean this information. So to help us do that today, we brought on Paul Perdichizzi of the Saturday2Sunday Football Podcast. You can find him on Twitter at Pauly23NY. Paul, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you guys so much. Glad to be here. Combine's in the rearview mirror. So much to break down and talk about. So it's a pleasure to be on here with you guys.
Absolutely. Well, hey, today we're going to be breaking down the combine winners and losers, these guys who saw their stock increase, guys who saw their stock decrease heading into the NFL draft. And so it's in the books, so it's important now to take a look back and give you all a glimpse into who performed well and who we need to go back to the tape on here. So what I want to do for this episode is kind of just send this around the room. We're just going to be listing off these guys who we were impressed with here, who kind of popped off the screen, those numbers that kind of shocked us here. And so we're going to be looking at these guys. I'll send it around the room. Paul, since you're our guest, you kind of get to go first here, man, and then we'll go to tags, and then I'll go here, and we'll just go around the room as many times as we can. So, Paul, who elevated their stock? Who had a good day?
Yeah, I think the first name I want to bring up is at the wide receiver position, and that's Justin Jefferson out of LSU. He was already a guy who was on the round 1, round 2 border, but to run a 40 time, a 4.43, a 37.5 vert jump, and a 10.6 broad, I think he showed a lot more explosion and athleticism and speed. Everyone knew he was a really refined route runner, very fluid in his movement skills, but he was kind of pigeonholed a little bit as maybe only a slot guy. But I think this testing kind of showed that was just a role LSU really asked him to play, and that might be his best role. I mean, I've heard the comparisons to Keenan Allen. I know over at Saturday to Sunday, I've mentioned in terms of he reminded me a lot of Chris Godwin, a little bit different body type, but that inside-outside versatility. But this speed really kind of changes the narrative a little bit because now he might be able to do more on the outside and even win more vertically down the field in addition to inside, and maybe he just wasn't asked to do it so much at LSU.
I'm known as someone that maybe sometimes I'm a little in the dark in terms of what people expected, but I remember, so Yates and I messaged literally throughout every day pretty much, but the combine even more so because we were talking about the players that were involved. And Jefferson's someone that we both fell in love with while watching him, and he's like, oh, this 40 times great for him. I'm like, was it really expected that he was going to be really bad? I kind of thought he'd be like a high 4.4 guy, maybe a low 4.5, and so I wasn't really shocked by the time, and I think it just comes down to me being out of tune with maybe what others are expecting, because what I saw on tape is a guy that he really is a complete receiver. I wanted to see him add some weight onto his frame because I think he's a little thin to absorb some of those hits over the middle of the field, but I think he actually weighed in over what I thought he'd be coming to the combine too. I actually had Justin Jefferson mocked at the end of the first round to the Packers 2 weeks ago when I put out my first mock draft. So I loved Justin Jefferson then. I love him now. This did nothing for me. I loved him all along. Yates, did this move him up? I know you were already excited about him. I think I had him as my number 4 receiver. I think you might have had him as, did you have him at 4 or 5?
I had him at 5 going into the combine. So with Justin Jefferson, though, again, and I said this with our last podcast when we went over this stuff, having someone at 5 does not mean that I dislike them. This is just a really good class. And so with Justin Jefferson, I really, on tape, you did not see him stretching the field. Yes, he could run out of the slot. He could run those deep fades, and there are several examples of it. One that comes to mind immediately is against Texas. He's operating out of the slot there repeatedly and scores a touchdown on a pass like that, goes up and high points the ball. So I think for me, it was more so a question and kind of getting locked into what other people were thinking that he was going to run. And I really was like, if he comes in and runs a 4.55, I'm good. Like, that's perfect. That's where I kind of expected him to be, and that's what I wanted him to be. He comes in and runs a 4.43. Great, sign me up. Like this is exactly what I wanted to see out of him. And just like you said, Paul, like this kind of exemplifies that he can play on the outside. He can play on the outside. He can stretch the field if need be. And with his ability to get open, my word, just if he gets paired with a quarterback that, is able to find him downfield, this is going to be fantastic for fantasy football. So I think, Tags, you said you mocked him at the end of the first round there. With the combine results, what you saw, when you sit down to do your next mock draft, are you going to be moving him up even further than Packers at 30?
I probably am, because I think Jalen Reagor, we're going to talk about him a little bit later in the show, but I would think that he's going to move down. I wouldn't be shocked if Jefferson goes inside the top 20 picks now. Is it possible that he slides to the Packers? Yeah, and I think that he's a perfect fit to them. He could walk into that like old Jordy Nelson role. He's faster than Jordy Nelson. Nelson was just an extremely smart route runner, and that's what you have in Jefferson too, but knowing you have the speed with it, knowing that he can play the slot, which is another area of need for them, because outside of Devontae Adams, they really have nothing on that team of substance. So I think Jefferson really fits the mold that they need there. Maybe even Reagor, if he falls, I think the Packers should be looking at a wide receiver there at the end of the first.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, Tags, who did you have up?
So I want to ask you guys a question before we move on to mine. So both of you guys, if Justin Jefferson, let's pretend that he does fall to the Packers, where would you guys draft him in a redraft league today? Would you draft him? Like, obviously rookie receivers have a little bit more difficult time, performing. Last year was kind of an outlier in terms of like production, because a lot of rookie wide receivers kind of blew the charts. But how would you guys feel about Justin Jefferson if he was tied to Aaron Rodgers?
I mean, I'll jump in. I would probably say I would look at him as like my fourth wide receiver. I wouldn't want to count on him to immediately be a guy, assuming we're talking about like 3 wide receiver leagues and a flex. I don't think I'd want him in the starting lineup just yet, but I think his upside in that offense, and because I do think he's one of the more pro-ready, I wouldn't be that surprised if he has a better first season than somebody like CD Lamb, especially if he's in a better offense. I think he is a little bit more refined than CD Lamb, and CD Lamb is coming from the Big 12 and not a lot of defense there. So I'd be excited about him, but it's always hard for those wide receivers to make the transition. I think Jefferson might find it easier than some, and this year we did see a lot make a immediate impact in terms of redraft, but I'd probably be more of like, I want him to be my fourth wide receiver and take a wait-and-see approach to get him in my starting lineup.
What about you, Yates? Like, put him up against someone like Anthony Miller. Would you draft Anthony Miller or Justin Jefferson?
That's a great question, because I think Anthony Miller, the Bears have high hopes for him.
Yep.
And moving forward, and there's no one else really of note like Riley Ridley, Javon Wims in that offense. So there's really no one else that I can think take those targets. So that's interesting. Again, we're betting on this, or hypothesizing here on this situation of him going to the Packers. That offense wasn't fantastic for producing fantasy points, right? We saw Aaron Jones go off, and we saw Devontae Adams certainly, be fine for fantasy, but I wouldn't call it anything, outstanding. So then you add in someone else like Justin Jefferson. I don't know. I think I would take Anthony Miller in that situation. But again, I'm kind of in that same situation with Paul, where I'd be like, I want him as my 4, maybe 5 wide receiver, which I think you can get. I think you'd be able to get him at that. And so, yeah, that's someone who I would feel comfortable there with that 5th wide receiver there in that range.
For sure. I just wanted to ask that. And so I'll get into one of my biggest winners of the draft. And Donovan Peoples-Jones, I wanted to bring him up because there's a lot of people that they weren't so high on him, and not necessarily because they didn't think that he was a good athlete, but more so to do with like they look at college production. And I'm not going to lie about this. I don't look at college production very much. I understand that people tend to think that just because someone's more talented, they're going to walk into more opportunity. I think it really depends on the situation. And playing at Michigan, it's not a pass attack, right? He's not going to get a whole lot of opportunities there. But knowing he went there with his peers, weighed in 212 pounds, 6'2", 44.5-inch vertical, 4.48 40. 11'7" broad jump. I mean, this guy jumped out of the gym and like he lit the world on fire. And we saw at Michigan that he was this contested catch guy, that he could consistently win those contested catches. Does this make you guys think that maybe he's more than they were using him at Michigan? What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, to me, Donovan Peoples-Jones is a guy that has underperformed. And listen, I'm sure part of it's his own fault, but I think the bigger part has been the offense that he's in, the quarterback play that he's been in. He's a guy that, he was in my top 15 in terms of my wide receiver rankings because it is such a deep class, but I was kind of expecting him to go here and be a riser in this process. So I was excited to see him perform up to the expectations I thought. I think he was locked in to be a day 2 pick, and I just think there were some people maybe who didn't want to recognize that, who really do look a lot more at the production and the market share and stuff like that. But I think the NFL really looks at the context of things a lot more than maybe, the talk is on Twitter on a regular basis, and I think they understand the situation that he was in and the opportunity or lack thereof opportunity that he got, and he could be one of those guys, and it's not often that we say this, who could be a better NFL player than college player, but I do think that's serves him well, and I do think that statement is going to be, bear out with Donovan Peoples-Jones. So I like his body control, his ball skills, his ability to adjust. I think we're going to see him be a much different player when he gets an opportunity, at the NFL level, and he's playing in a different style offense with better quarterback play. So he was definitely on my list as a winner as well.
Yeah, this is what Donovan Peoples-Jones needed to show up to the combine and do, because the tape is inconsistent. The tape isn't great. And so, but what you can sell to NFL teams is, well, I'm ultra athletic. And so from there, an NFL team is going to take their, shot on Donovan Peoples-Jones and say, okay, well, the traits are there. We can iron out some of the kinks. We can get him into our building and say and see definitively, okay, was it just based on how terrible Shea Patterson was, or how terrible the scheme was at Michigan, or is this something where we just need to wait and develop him? So I think for him, you don't make those kind of numbers, right? Like those type of numbers don't come around often. And so for him to go to the combine and do that, that's what he needed to do to be able to show NFL teams, hey, you can take a chance on me. If he had jumped at like a 35 or a 37, inch in the vertical, yep, at that point, his draft stock's plummeting, right?
It's day 3 for sure.
Right, because the tape suggests day 3. However, when you get this guy who can now back up, and say, okay, take your chance on me in the 4th round, 3rd round of the NFL draft, you're betting on athleticism, and you can translate down the road. So yeah, for me, Donovan Peoples-Jones was a definite riser.
Yeah, I don't know if he moves past like the 3rd round, which doesn't mean he's going to get opportunity right out of the gate. Like some of these other guys that we don't need to talk about Jerry Jeudy. We don't need to talk about CeeDee Lamb. These guys were already going to be 1st round picks. They were already going to be top 15 picks. Those guys are going to have the most impact. I don't think Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to have an impact in terms of like redraft leagues in year 1. Is there someone that maybe you think stood out at the combine that you think could have an impact on day 1, Yates, when you watched?
I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily go as far as day 1, but he's been a super fast riser throughout this process, and that's Denzel Mims out of Baylor. Yep. For me, when I watched Mims' tape, I saw the potential, but I also saw the inconsistencies. And so for him, he showed up to the Senior Bowl, and he received great reports. Everything I heard coming out of the Senior Bowl was that he played really, really well, did really, really well. And then he comes up to the combine at 6'3", 207, listen to these numbers, a 4.38 40-yard dash, 16 reps on the bench press, which it's strong for a wide receiver, but then 38.5 inches in the vertical jump, 131 inches in the broad jump, but this is the one that got me, a 6.66 seconds 3-cone drill. That is moving through the 3-cone. And so now you're saying, okay, this guy has great top-end speed, but he also has elite agility. And so now what can we do with him? We get him into our offense. And so I think his stock is soaring through the roof, because now this is a player where we get him into our building. And, in day 2, I think he solidified himself in day 2. I don't know where exactly, but he's going to fall into some favorable situation where we could be looking at Denzel Mims as potentially an early round 2 dynasty rookie pick. So I don't know if he'll have immediate value in redraft leagues right out of the gate, but Paul, when you watched Denzel Mims at Baylor, did you see kind of those same things? Did you have kind of those same concerns? And then what's your impression of him at the combine?
Yeah, so to me, I saw a guy who could obviously win vertically down the field. He had that speed, he had that explosion, he had the body control, the ability to adjust and all that stuff. And he kind of showed that at the Senior Bowl, his one-on-ones. He was just winning them consistently there. So then he gets to the combine, and I'm blown away a little bit by the the straightaway speed and stuff like that. But it wasn't that surprising. I didn't know how fast he would be, but I knew he would test well there and the jumps and stuff like that. But I didn't see the change of direction stuff coming in as low as it did, because when I did watch him on film, I almost kind of felt a little bit the same way I felt about DK Metcalf last year. That DK Metcalf was really good at a limited few routes, and he dominated on those routes. And I kind of thought at Baylor, they used Denzel Mims. I thought he had a limited route tree, but the routes he was asked to run, he was very good at them. He was very proficient, and I saw that translating in that capacity. I didn't see a lot of like separation quickness in him running the full route tree. And I still think, even though he's scored well on the change of direction drill, I do think there's still some refinement there. But I do see him maybe having an impact, because there's a couple of routes I think he runs really well, and if an NFL team just asks him to really focus on those as he continues to develop his game, I think he's someone that his stock is clearly on the rise. And I don't know if you happen to see it, but Daniel Jeremiah put out his latest mock draft post-combine, and DJ always says the mock drafts is what he's hearing, not based on his personal rankings.
Right.
And he had Denzel Mims at the end of round 1. I forget what team it was to, but that just tells you that, maybe, it was at the back end, but it could just tell you that a lot of buzz and a lot of what he was hearing there, that now we're talking about this guy as maybe a round 1, round 2 guy. So that in its own right. I mean, he had him in the first round. He didn't have Reagor. He didn't have T. Higgins. I don't think. So he had these, now Denzel Mims pushing to that level in terms of the pecking order. And if that happens, it's going to be hard to keep him out of, the late round 1 or early round 2 of dynasty rookie drafts for sure.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's so weird. And this is part of the reason that I think that there's a middle ground, because there's some people that think that the combine is worthless. They're like, what I see on tape is what matters. And then there's some people that said your eyes will lie to you. And I think there's something in between there, right? Because my notes on Mims were almost like, Paul, it's almost like they contradicted each other with mine and yours. I thought he had suddenness in his routes off the line of scrimmage. I thought he had burst off the line of scrimmage. I thought he would do well in the 3-cone drill, but I did not think that he had great long speed. He does take long strides, and my notes said it allows him to separate more than you'd expect, despite him not having maybe that long speed that I thought. And to see him running like a 4.38, I'm like, wow. Like, so he does have that, and I thought he does have suddenness. There are areas of his game that he has some growing to do for sure, but I believe he looks the part, he's built the part, he's obviously athletic enough to play the part, and if he's going to get drafted late first round, early second round, I'll even say by the end of the second round, that means this kid's going to get an opportunity right away. You might look at a team like the Bills taking a shot on him because he's not that John Brown receiver, where John Brown's kind of like that. He's a smaller guy. I think they need a bigger guy, a guy that could be a presence in the red zone. And Mims, I believe at 6'3", 207 pounds, he could be that guy. So that could be a team that you're looking at to maybe draft Denzel Mims, or even someone like Donovan Peoples-Jones like later in the draft, because they need to get Josh Allen a bigger target, because Cole Beasley and John Brown, while they are good receivers, they're not big. They're not a big-bodied receiver, and they were trying to do that with Kelvin Benjamin, but we all know the tragic ending to that story.
Yeah, for sure. Paul, who do you have up next? Who impressed you?
So we'll stay with the wide receiver position. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Chase Claypool. He's a guy from Notre Dame. Obviously, he was in that big mix of guys that were being rumored to be day 2 guys. But I mean, there's like 12 to like 20 names in that mix. And I think he definitely helped his cause here at the combine. I mean, coming in 6'4", 238, there was a lot of talk earlier in the week of the combine that some teams were maybe asking him to do the tight end drills. And I always found that a little funny, because if he was a tight end, we would basically just say he's a big wide receiver, and then he's a big wide receiver that they were just asking to make a move tight end.
Right.
Basically, like when Evan Ingram was coming down and stuff, oh, he's basically a wide receiver. Well, if that's who Chase Claypool was being compared to, we'd basically say he's a big wide receiver, just playing tight end. But I thought he had good athleticism for a man his size, but I thought that was going to be like 4'5", 4'5'2", kind of like Michael Pittman, another guy who I thought helped his cause. But that's kind of where I thought Chase Claypool's athleticism and speed was. I wasn't expecting a 4.42 from him with a 40.5 vert and 10.6 broad. I mean, those are really astounding numbers. This is 2 years in a row now, a Notre Dame wide receiver goes to the combine. Last year, Miles Boykin, and now Chase Claypool, and just really shatters, I think, expectations of what people thought of him going in. So whatever a team wants to do with him, if they want to make him a big slot, if they want to use him as a move tight end, I think he showed now he's versatile, that he could basically line up outside if you want him to. He can line up inside. He can be a big slot or a move tight end. And he's a guy that NFL teams are going to love. He's a great special teams player as well. And I know, that's just something that I bring up because I do think it matters to NFL teams that it could just elevate his stock. And elevated stock means higher draft capital, more opportunity to show your, to meet that draft capital. So he was a guy that I knew he was going to test out pretty good for a man his size and frame. The weight adjusted, the size adjusted scores I thought were going to be really good for him, but I didn't see 4.42 when I watched him. I still think he's got some refinement in his routes and some separation quickness getting in and out of those, but I mean, with his body size and frame and to have that speed just in his back pocket, to me, I think he's pushed his way into round 2, when before the combine I would have said I think he's more of a round 3 guy. I thought he was going to go in the top 100, but I think he's probably pushed his way into the latter part of round 2, maybe even mid-round 2. But again, it's so hard with this wide receiver class and it's so deep. I think it kind of depends like when the run starts, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with Claypool, it's interesting. It's an interesting conversation because, again, I don't think he was someone who, like you said, Paul, I don't think we were really expecting anything huge, but he comes to the combine and he absolutely blows it up. And now he's on the radar, right? And he's potentially even on the fantasy football radar where we're looking at him if he falls into the right situation. So let's take this, for example. Let's say Washington. They have a need at the tight end position now with Jordan Reed being released. Okay, so now Claypool goes there in the 2nd or 3rd round, maybe even the 4th. I don't think he falls to the 4th. But do we look at him in fantasy, like in dynasty rookie drafts? And if so, where? Tags, what do you think?
He's one of those guys, so I'm glad you brought him up because like a lot of people asked me, because I came out with an article today that had the risers and the fallers of the combine, and I didn't put him in there, and someone said that I was out of my mind to not put him in there, and I think they were right in the aspect that he probably should have been there, considering he scored like a 99th percentile speed score, 92nd percentile burst score. He was a lot faster than I thought he was going to be. Like from what I saw on tape with him, I said that he looked like a smaller tight end. He lacked any sort of a burst or it's almost with a wide receiver, you want to see suddenness in their play, and I didn't see it with him. And if you started looking at him as like a tight end, I might look at him differently. But knowing that the free agent class of tight ends is so good, I don't know if any of these tight ends are going to walk into a spot where they're playing right away. I didn't have Claypool as a guy that should go in the top 3 rounds prior to the combine. I'm going to go back and rewatch him because obviously there may be something I missed. Because again, when we're trying to fly through 200 prospects before the combine, we can miss things, and that's why it's like these things pop up. And there's a few defensive players we're not going to talk about today, but they popped up, and I'm like, wow, I need to go back and rewatch them because maybe I missed something. He's kind of one of those players that I have to go back and rewatch. But from what I did watch, I just my finishing line on him was I don't see anything in here that suggests that he's going to be a playmaker in the NFL.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's definitely going to be interesting where he ends up, and that can dictate the entire conversation. If he falls behind,
I think a lot of it, yeah,
right.
I think a lot of it, we've talked about that before. Where like landing spot that absolutely matters more than I think most people want to admit. And yes, if he fell in a situation where it's like he's drafted and the Redskins don't sign another tight end, then obviously you'd want to look at him and say, I think there is more value than even I gave him.
Right, and I think the conversation of landing spot, it matters with some of these later guys. With guys like Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb, like I think they're landing spot proof. I think wherever they land, they're going to be fine. They're going to be good for fantasy football. But when we're talking about these later guys, that's where, we start to get into some of those more like interesting situations and scenarios there. So, all right, I think we're up with you, Tags. Who was another player who impressed you here?
All right, I'm going to jump positions, and I'm going to go to the guy that absolutely destroyed the running back position, and it's not Jonathan Taylor. Now, Jonathan Taylor was a riser, but A.J. Dillon, okay, there was talk about him becoming a fullback entering the NFL because he's a big dude. Like, you watch him, he's 247 pounds, and you're like, the NFL just isn't made for a guy like that anymore. He's a bruiser, he's this, he's that. Well, he goes out there at 247 pounds, and he runs a 4.5, 340. He goes out there and jumps 41 inches in the vertical, best at the running back position. And then the broad jump, a full 3 inches better than any other running back that took part in that. 23 reps in the bench. Like, do we have to rethink A.J. Dillon as a running back? Like, do we look at him? What I wrote on A.J. Dillon was I said that he's like Leonard Fournette without the long speed. And I know that like it's going to get some laughs because Leonard Fournette has been somewhat of a disappointment to me. I expected a lot more out of him coming out. We haven't seen that long speed. He hasn't had the vision or maybe even the offensive scheme to get through that initial 10 yards to see that open field. But A.J. Dillon seems like a slower Leonard Fournette. But the 4.5, 340, it obviously suggests he's not Leonard Fournette. But at the same time, all these other measurements, he's explosive. Is there room in today's NFL for him? That's what I ask you guys. Like if he lands in a spot, let's say that Miami waits on running back and they take A.J. Dillon and pair him with like a pass catching back. How do you guys feel about A.J. Dillon in Dynasty?
I'll jump in
Paul,
there.
yeah, go for it.
A.J. Dillon was a guy that I've been a big fan on, and I was a little bit on an island. He's been my number 6 running back. I think the top 5 is pretty well established that most people, I know Zach Moss is in there for some people, but most people, obviously have the Swift, the Dobbins, the Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor, and Cam Akers. That seems to be the consensus top 5 if you polled a lot of people. And then I think it really is up for grabs after that with Zach Moss being high on a lot of people's lists. But I've had A.J. Dillon there established as my number 6 guy, and going into the combine, I didn't think anything was going to move that, and he's still not moving because I still like the top 5 guys better because I think they're more well-rounded. But Dillon, I think for sure has a place in the NFL. Is he the prototype for today's modern day NFL? No, and you got to know what you're getting in A.J. Dillon. You're not going to get a guy who's going to create a lot for himself if you have a poor offensive line, or he's stopped in the a defender gets into the backfield. He's not going to be a guy who's going to help out much on third downs. Could he maybe catch a check down pass or something like that? Sure. But he is a really good runner in terms of his power, his contact balance, his short area burst. And if he picks up steam, see, I wasn't surprised by the 40. I actually was a guest on a podcast last week, the Rookie Fever podcast, and I said, and this was literally the day before the combine started, and I was like, people are going to be listening to this probably either during the combine or post-combine, and I was like, I think he's going to run a sub 4.5. He was on Bruce Feldman's freak list before the season started. And, Bruce Feldman's not putting him on that list if he doesn't have some pretty good intel that he's going to blow up, different aspects of the combine. I didn't know if it was going to translate to the 40 as much as the jumps, but it did. And I do think if you compliment him well, I know I was talking to Sig Bloom on Twitter about A.J. Dillon the other night, and we were throwing around some landing spots, and we said, obviously, the obvious one is Tennessee if they move on from Derrick Henry. He would fit well in that offense, in that scheme. We were saying maybe Buffalo to complement Singletary, big power bruising back in Buffalo, in the winter would make some sense. So there was a couple different spots. I even threw out there maybe in Dave Veree, Carolina, to give them another running back to maybe take some of the wear and tear off Christian McCaffrey. And obviously those landing spots are all very different in terms of what his fantasy capacity would be. But I could see a scenario where he is now maybe he sneaks into the back end of the top 100, so maybe he's a late round 3 pick. I still think, as much as I like him, he's still probably penciled for round 4. But I think there's a role for him in the NFL, and I think he helped his cause here. And even if he's a round 4 guy, I think he's going to get an opportunity to work his way up to, a decent role in an offense. It just depends on that landing spot, how much of a role.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the conversation of him moving to fullback has been tabled with those numbers. I still have my concerns, especially with his start-stop ability in his burst. So I think for him, he needs to end up in a downhill running scheme where if you're going to be asking him to run inside zones and to be able, or traps, or to be able to start and stop quickly, and I think you're not going to be utilizing him the right way. For me, he's someone with change of direction too, kind of struggles with that. And we even saw that in the combine drills a little bit too. Yeah, he spun out of a couple of them, but for him to go laterally doesn't really happen as naturally. So I think he's someone who, kind of like a Derrick Henry though, he gets a head of steam and it's like, I don't want to tackle that dude. That dude's running at me at 247. Like, I don't want to tackle him. So I think he's going to be very limited with his options as far as like what could be fantasy relevant, where, yeah, like I said, downhill running scheme. Okay, well, that takes away a ton of teams in the NFL. Okay, well, then you need someone who is going to be willing to give him the ball a ton. Okay, well, then be, in the running game, because again, like you mentioned, Paul, he's not going to be someone who contributes heavily in the receiving game. So it's like these different things pile up with A.J. Dillon, but we're talking about him in a different breadth than we were before the combine, which I think is great for his stock. But now it's all going to be, okay, where does he end up and what can his outcome be? For me, I'm going to bring up another player here That's Adam Trautman out of Dayton, tight end. And for me, his 40-yard dash isn't necessarily super impressive. 4.8, it'll play. But for me, that wasn't something when watching his tape that I was super impressed with, right? Where I was like, I don't think he has super great breakaway speed. For me, what impressed me on when watching his tape was his fluidity and movement and change of direction. And that showed up in his 3-cone. At 6'5", 255 pounds, Adam Trautman ran a 6.78 3-cone drill. And so for me, that shows elite agility and elite change of direction. And so for me, he moved up in my rankings because he showed that what I saw on tape, he backed it up here at the combine. Now, again, coming out of Dayton, the level of competition isn't exactly, high tier. And so I'm interested to see, what you guys think about Adam Trautman, especially his, combine performance. Where are we at with him now? Paul, I'll go to you first. What's your thoughts here on Adam Trautman?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Adam Trautman. He was my number 1 tight end going into the combine.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah, so he was my number 1. Then I had the Bryant guys, and then Cole Kmet. But to stick on Trautman, I think the 4.8 was about what I expected. I was kind of hoping maybe for a little bit better, maybe like a 4.74, 4.75. But as you saw on film, I don't think that's his, I don't think he has that, top level speed, but the movement skills is what really impressed me. And you don't see a lot of tight ends, and I understand it was a lower level of college, but you don't see a lot of tight ends having to deal with double teams regularly. He was the offense for his program,
right?
And he was constantly, dealing with double teams. Now, obviously, the level of caliber play that he was going against isn't an NFL caliber of defender, but it just showed that he was able to overcome that, win in spite of that. And I like the movement skills. The change of direction stuff was even better than I thought he was going to test out, but I'm not that surprised with it because, as you said, it was that fluidity. It was that you saw that in his tape. And then all the reports since the Senior Bowl were that, he really impressed down there. People said they came away more impressed too with his blocking, something that you didn't really get a chance to see on the film, and because they just didn't ask him to do that. He was their primary receiver, but right. All the people who I really rely on in terms of the Dane Bruglers of the world who are reporting everything from they've seen at the Senior Bowl was that he was really holding his own. So he's a little bit more of a complete tight end than I think just watching his highlights and his game film from Dayton would show you, because he just wasn't asked to do that. So for me, I think his stock is up. I actually think he's in a race with Cole Kmet now to be the first tight end taken actually, in the NFL draft. I think, to me, he has a lot of Dallas Goedert in him in terms of, I think that's the type of player he can morph into. Dallas Goedert, we had questions about whether or not he would be a great blocker. He became that once we saw it, and he was asked to do that at the NFL level. I think Trautman can get to be a good or at least functional blocker and have that pass catching upside.
Yeah, I was more worried on Trautman as a blocker. That was why his stock was going to fall with me. We knew that the traits, I think he was expected, as you mentioned, to do a little bit better athletically, but in the drills he did look fluid, and I think we should have expected that. He came to college as a quarterback. He's still learning the tight end position, and we know that athletically, to be as big as he is, to move as well as he does, that's something that teams are going to covet. But I don't see why they would pass on someone like Bryson Hopkins, who he also can't block, but he moves a bit more. He's been playing the position for longer. He can probably contribute. I would think that Trautman is going to latch on with a team that probably has a tight end in place already, and that he's going to kind of be a depth guy where maybe the Steelers are able to get him a little bit later. This is the first time I'm hearing someone say Trautman that high, so maybe you have him going in round 1 or 2. I had him falling into maybe that 3rd, 4th round range. So I mentioned him on our Dynasty podcast that we talked about, our favorite, and I said Trautman was someone I wanted to shout out because I feel like the potential's there, but I think there's still going to be some development coming from Dayton, and obviously still learning that tight end position. If
I could just jump in again, I agree that he should be a 3rd round guy. That's where I have him. I don't have anybody in this tight end class, to be honest with you.
It's not very good.
If I was a decision maker, yeah. I don't think there should be a tight end taken in round 1 or round 2. I think a lot of these guys are, in terms of what you prefer, round 3 and round 4, I think should be the sweet spot for probably the top 5 to 8 tight ends, to be honest with you, on the board. And I like Trautman's upside the most. I could see someone Cole Kmet tested out a lot better athletically than I think anybody expected.
Yeah, he did.
So I think he probably is going to be the first name off the board coming from a bigger program. It sounded like he was high on most people's boards in the NFL circles prior to this. But I think Trautman's now in that mix to be one of the top tight ends taken. But I do think it probably should not be in the top 50. I think all these guys should definitely be round 3 and a lot in the top of round 4.
It's a great clarification. All right, guys, let's move on to who saw their stock decline over the weekend in Indianapolis here. So I'll turn it right back around to you, Paul. Who was someone who stood out to you where you're like, man, that just didn't match up with what I saw on tape? Who's seeing their stock decline here?
One guy I want to bring up, and it's a little bit off the radar, but KJ Hill, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, I liked him a lot on film, and this is going back from last summer when I watched him, and he's a guy that just always seems to be open in that Ohio State offense, and I always thought he was a quicker than fast guy, but I still thought, I didn't think he was going to be a blazer like Terry McLaurin last year or anybody like that, but I thought he was going to be a guy that was maybe in that 4.45-ish area, 4.45 to 4.5, and I was like, if that's where he comes in, I think that's good enough. I like his separation quickness. I like his route running. The reports on him, down at the Senior Bowl were really strong that people were struggling to cover him. And then he runs a 4.6, and I do think that hurts him because, for the style of player he's not a guy who's going to win with physicality and, jump balls and stuff like that. So I think for him, he needed to show a little bit better in the speed component for me to potentially be a round 3 pick. I thought he was on that round 3, round 4 border. And I think that's where he was a little bit. And again, that number goes like 25 deep. And, as some of these guys are saying, there are some people who think there's 25 to 27 guys that could be graded as top 100 guys. And I kind of thought maybe KJ Hill was in that mix of 25, 26 wide receivers that could potentially be in that conversation. But I was a little disappointed in that 40 time that I think he's a guy who now pushes in this deep of a class. I think he pushes to day 3 now, and I don't think the top 100 is really realistic after he runs a 4.6.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, with KJ Hill, it was someone whose tape I really liked, but again, that 4.6 was just not where I wanted it to be. And so, yeah, I agree with you, Paul. I think his stock's declining. I'm glad that you brought him up because I definitely didn't have him on my list here, but I'm glad that you brought him up. All right, Tags, what about you?
This one pains me to say, and I'm not giving up on him as a prospect, but it definitely hurt his stock, was Quintez Cephas.
I knew you were going to go with him.
Yeah, I still love the player. I really do, and I'm really hoping that this doesn't bury his stock because, as we know in the NFL, if you're not taken in we'll say the top 4 rounds to move your way up the depth chart is going to be extremely tough. And this reminds me a lot of Auden Tate. A couple of years ago. Auden Tate was someone that I actually liked more than most coming into the combine. I felt like he was a guy that was great in contested catch situations, wasn't necessarily the best separator. And I'm not comparing him as a player to Cephas, but it's more about he ran a 4.68 and it buried his stock. He dropped down draft boards. He wasn't drafted until the 7th round. And we had to watch how many injuries had to take place in the Bengals this year for him to get an opportunity. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, this Auden Tate guy is not bad. And that's how I feel. It's like Cephas is a better football player to me than Auden Tate. But if he's drafted in the 6th or 7th round, that's going to be a real big issue for him to try and get playing time. So unfortunately, he's going to fall off the redraft radar altogether because of this. But he's still somebody that I look forward to getting late in dynasty drafts just because this is a player I do believe in. So Paul, I'm curious because I've talked with Yates about this. How do you feel about Cephas as a player? I had him as a top 10 wide receiver coming into this, and I'm not going to shy off that because he ran a 4.73, but I do know that he's not going to be drafted as a top 10 wide receiver.
Yeah, Cephas is a guy, he's not in my top 10, but he's a guy that I did like a lot on film. And he's a guy that, I think when you watch him, to me, I envisioned his role as a big slot at the next level. And maybe he could do maybe a little bit of a Z flanker position on the outside as well. But I thought he was a guy who was going to have to win with his play strength, his toughness, his physicality. I thought he showed good physicality, not only during the route and at the catch point, but then I thought he showed it after the catch as well. And he was a guy who could pick up yak after the catch, but it wasn't really in the traditional way of using using speed and agility. It was more with that strength and power. You see it from like an Anquan Bolden or an A.J. Brown. And I thought he had some of that, and his body control, his ability to adjust. So I'm not giving up on him because, again, I thought he would maybe be a 4.6 guy or 4.5, high 4.5s, like 4.59 or 4.6, somewhere in that range. So it was definitely a little slower than I anticipated. But in the role that I envision him, I still think he's a guy who can be productive at the next level. But as you said, opportunity is so much sometimes, associated with draft capital, and it's really hard for these guys if they don't have much draft capital, especially round 6, round 7, to really ever get an opportunity. So I think that's the issue. Before the combine, I thought I actually had him as again in that mix of that round 3, round 4 border, that if you were going to try to come up with those 25 to 27 names that people like, Mel Kiper and Daniel Jeremiah said could potentially be in the top 100 mix, I definitely had him in that group. I don't know what this does for his stock. I would say probably the top 3 rounds is unrealistic. I'm hoping for round 4, worst case scenario, round 5. I think it was Jeffrey Okudah, who's the number 1 cornerback in this class. Somebody asked him, it might have been Fran Duffy.
Yep.
It was him. And
I don't know who it was that asked that. I already know where you're going with that. And I it's something you have to think about. Just building on this, I know it's a totally different player, but Joe Burrow, they asked him who's the best football player he ever played with, and he said Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like hands down. So it's like, I actually take stock in that. When a player and he's played with Jamar Chase, like that dude is going to be the 101 pick. We know that. So I actually put stock into this, like in terms of the Okudah thing. Love that you brought that up. I totally forgot.
Yeah, they asked Okudah who was the toughest opponent you ever faced, and or had to cover 1-on-1, and obviously Okudah's covering the best, every single week, and he said it was Quintez Cephas. That should speak volumes. This is a guy who people are comparing to be a shutdown corner on a level of a Patrick Peterson or a Gilmore, and he said that this is the guy. So I think some stock should be put in that, and some guys just are better football players than obviously combine testers, and I think Cephas, it could be that guy. And again, I think worst case scenario, he's a guy, who like a Quincy Enunwa. I think that to me is a guy he could be if given an opportunity, and I think that would be like the floor. But again, it all really depends on how much opportunity and leeway he gets.
Yeah, it's going to be the big thing with Cephas. And again, I'm in the same boat as you guys. I'm not giving up on him as a player, as a prospect, but it is going to be very difficult for him to get that opportunity. It could be something where he lands as the 4th or 5th wide receiver on a team and then has to wait for an injury to crack the lineup, and kind of like like you were saying, Tags, with Auden Tate there. For me, a player who I was pretty disappointed in and who I think we're seeing their stock plummet is Savon Ahmed out of Washington, running back. He was someone who I was really, really high on as far as enjoying his tape. I didn't have him ranked super high because of his size and his limitations, but I thought that his juice, his top-end speed on tape, his footwork is outstanding. This was just a guy that I really enjoyed watching. And so for me, coming out of high school too, Savon Ahmed was clocked at a 4.32 40-yard dash. In that class with Cam Akers, he was one of the top, if not the top, fastest running back there. So with that 4.32 time. So, and that showed up repeatedly on tape. And so then we get to the combine, and I'm going, all right, we're going to see Savon Ahmed, blow some people's minds here. He might actually run the fastest 40-yard dash here. And he shows up and he runs a 4.62 at 5'11", 197 pounds. Yep. That's just not going to work. For his size and what he, needs to be at the NFL level, it's just not going to work. And so for me, Savon Ahmed was someone who I was really, really disappointed in. And at this point, I don't know if he even gets drafted. Paul, do you have any thoughts on, where we could see Savon Ahmed actually get drafted, if at all?
Yeah, I think he's a late round guy now. I think he's a round 6, round 7 guy. But like you said, I wouldn't be surprised, if he is a priority free agent now. I think in terms of college film, I think Myles Gaskin was way superior. And then look where he went and fell in the draft as well from the same program. So, yeah, he needed that calling card. There were times that you watch him on film and you thought that there was a lot of explosion and bursts, but he's a smaller guy. So, he's not a great receiver. He showed improvement there this year. So, he's not even really something that, he's this really good, refined, receiver that you can say, oh, that's his calling card. That's what's going to get him drafted. I don't think he's a guy that teams are going to look at and think is very good in pass protection. He doesn't run a lot of routes out of the backfield. This year he showed improvement in that regard, but it was mostly just on short stuff, check down stuff. So I think he needed a good combine to maybe be a round 4, round 5 guy. And now to put that number on tape at his size and frame, I think it pushes him to the later parts of the draft, if not, like you said, completely undrafted.
Yep, that's where I'm at with him too. I think you guys covered on there. He's looking for that timeshare role, and if you land in the 6th, 7th round, it's going to be really tough for you to get there. It reminds me of someone like James Williams. If you guys remember him, some people liked him during the draft process, and then he kind of fell in the draft, and then he was just trying to fight to stay on a practice squad. It just never happened. So unfortunately, I think that it kind of crushed it. And it's funny, Yates. I knew you kind of liked him, and then we saw that he was one of those guys we were talking about. We're like 4.6. Wow, couldn't believe that. I mean. Can we roll into another guy that I wanted to bring up, and Jalen Reagor? I still like him as a player, but I would be lying if I would say I was shocked when I saw his 40-yard dash come up. Is he someone that put on too much weight? Because when he weighed in at 206, a lot of people are like, oh, wow, he's going for that round 1 conversation, and he's trying to fight for one of those top receiver spots. He wants to show that he's durable. And people talked about him like a low 4.3, high 4.2 guy. And then we see him pop up in the 4.5s. Paul, what did you think about Jalen Reagor? Do you think that he's someone that hurt his draft stock where he's going to fall out of that first round conversation? Do you believe in him as a player? Do you think he added too much weight? What do you think the deal was during the combine?
Yeah, so he's right now my number 5 wide receiver. I'm a fan of his game. I think he's on that round 1, round 2 border. I do agree with you. I think his playing weight was probably more like 195. And I think he wanted to get over that 200, and in particular, probably he was aiming at that 205 number, because it just looks better. And I think he's more of a guy that is going to be playing weights probably like at that 195. I'd bet when his pro day comes around, I would bet we see more of a 4.4, maybe even a 4.39. If he gets weighed back in, I wouldn't be surprised if that number is down to like in the mid 190s, more of what he does. Because I think at this point now, he wants to show that he has that breakaway speed. I think he has great play speed. I think you mentioned it on the last podcast. I've been comparing him all year and since the summer to Brandon Cooks, and that's who I envision him. I mean, Cooks had 4.3 for 40-yard dash speed, but Cooks also had the ability to go up and get it. Overall, good athleticism, even at the catch point for a smaller guy in Cooks, and I think Reagor has that. So I'm still intrigued by him. To me, I almost cared less about the 4.47 because I think that's still plenty fast, and I think the weight impacted that. I was actually more surprised at the change of direction drills, because that's the thing that left me scratching my head with him, because I could get past the 4.47 because I do think he's a guy who could win at all 3 levels, and 4.47 still good enough to win vertically.
Yeah, I was just about to say we need to keep in mind and context just how fast 4.47 is. Like it's lower than expectations, right? That what we had for Reagor, but yeah, 4.47 is still pretty fast. Sorry, Paul.
No, yeah, I think it's a really good point, because I mean, you started hearing people say, "Well, maybe him or Ruggs, who's faster?" And I never really thought that was a legitimate question. I always thought Reagor was going to be more in that 4.38 to 4.42 range. So I would never have taken like over that number though and guessed 4.47. But I do think he's a guy that I still am a fan of his overall game. I'm surprised about the change of direction drills, because I feel like when you see him in the open field or you see him as a returner, I feel like he does have that change of direction, that stop-start acceleration, the ability to do that. So it's one of those things that maybe he didn't just practice that as much as maybe he should have. Maybe he thought like he could, get away with his natural skill in that. And I think a lot of these combine drills, it's like, practice is what you need to do to really ace these things. And maybe some guys just prioritize other things over it. But I don't see a guy when I watch his film that, struggles in changing directions. And we kind of had the same conversation a couple years ago with Dalvin Cook, and people freaked out over Dalvin Cook's change of direction drills and how poor they were. And, that's not an issue for him either at the next level in terms of stopping, starting, cutting ability. I don't think it would be much of an issue for Jalen Reagor in this class. Could the combine maybe push over now Justin Jefferson over him? Yeah, I think it probably does. Yeah. Could it bring Denzel Mims into the conversation? Maybe. Again, like if we're listening to the news out there, maybe it does. Maybe it pushes someone else up there. But if Reagor goes to his pro day and runs a 4.38, at a lower weight, I think it'll be forgotten pretty quickly.
Now, have we seen the video of his 3-cone drill yet? Because, like last year, everybody was freaking out about DK Metcalf and his 3-cone, and then we saw the video like a couple days later, and it was like him slipping through the drill, and that makes I know some people like mock it, but that makes a massive difference when we're talking about decimals of seconds.
No, I haven't seen anything yet. The NFL is very like tight-lipped on showing like 3-cone and 20-yard shuttles. Like I feel like
I don't know why.
Like back in the day, they used to have like a video feed on their website, like showing the vert jumps and the broad jumps. Like I think the hardcore draft nicks would be fascinated to have that just on the stream, like, on NFL.com or something. But they never show any of those.
Yeah, it's so weird. The 3-cone is one of the better drills for running backs and wide receivers.
Yeah, especially the type of wide receiver that Reagor was going to be asked to be. Where, you get the ball in his hands and he can pick up steam and utilize his long speed, but you did also have to have some of that start-stop, that, agility. So, all right, so I think we're back to Paul here, and then I'll go with one last one here before we run out of time.
Yep.
Sure. I'm going to move it over to the tight end position, not to pick on Washington anymore, but kind of going with the theme of guys that I think maybe added a little too much weight. I think Hunter Bryant is a guy that people expected to test better. I don't think people were expecting a 4.74. This is a guy basically who's a receiver playing tight end. You watch him on film. I like his play speed. I like his movement skills. So I was kind of expecting him to run like a 4.55 or a 4.58, something in that level speed. And then he runs a 4.74. Which doesn't really match up with what I thought I saw on film. I don't think he was 248. So I'm wondering if he wanted to try to show like more of like a prototypical tight end build, and he put on some weight as well, and maybe 10 pounds even. Like I thought his playing weight, I think his listed playing weight, I think was like 235 or 236 at Washington. So maybe that's what he played with at Washington, and maybe he put on too much in the process. I never really liked the comps to Evan Ingram. And I understood why people were going there, but Evan Ingram was much taller. And Evan Ingram, you could tell on his college film, was going to be a freak in terms of his 40-yard dash time and his overall athleticism. To me, I liked Hunter Bryant, but I always thought he was more of like a Jordan Reed. And I think right now, maybe even like a Trey Burton in terms of who his comparison is, in terms of he's not Evan Ingram's size. He doesn't have Evan Ingram's athleticism. I still think he's an intriguing guy. I still think maybe he's on that round 3, round 4 border, as we talked about before, with a lot of tight ends. But you're drafting him exclusively to be a move tight end to create mismatches. And 4.74 for a guy who's going to be exclusively a pass catching tight end who doesn't have the size and the frame to, hold up inside, I thought it was a little disappointing. I think it's going to hurt his stock a little bit. He's another guy I'm excited to see at a pro day if they weigh him and we find out a different weight and then what his updated 40 time might be, because I thought it was going to be more significantly lower than the 4.74.
Well, Paul, I'm glad that you brought him up, because he was actually the next guy that I was going to be talking about, because I had the exact same concerns with him. It was really confusing for him to come in at his added weight with the added, even strength too. He benched more than I thought he was going to, and then comes out and runs a slower 40 than what I thought he was going to, or what showed up on tape. And so for me, it was mostly just going to be like, I don't know what to do with this guy now, right? I think he's kind of in between positions where I don't think he's an inline blocker with his size, but yet I don't think he has the speed to be that move tight end now. So it's kind of this, okay, what do we do with him? So yeah, I'm really glad that you brought him up. For me, I'll close out with kind of these guys who saw their stock decline. I'll go with Jake Fromm out of Georgia. Now for quarterbacks, we talk about combine performances and the 40-yard dash, these, broad jumps, whatever. They really don't carry much weight, specifically when we're looking at them for fantasy football. But there are two things that happened during the combine that I want to point out with Jake Fromm. One was his hand measurement at 8 7/8 inches. That's small for a quarterback. We just have to acknowledge it. Like, these guys, yes, they can make it work, and but it's one of those things where we're looking at these prospects and we're trying to put all these little puzzle pieces together to put together this puzzle, this picture of who this prospect is, who this player can be in the NFL. And for me, with that hand size, it's concerning. It's something where I'm kind of taking it into context and just saying, like, okay, it's concerning to come in under 9 inches. And then the other thing was just watching the on-field drills with Jake Fromm. He really did not have enough arm strength to be, matching up. And I was listening to, I can't remember who it was, but I was listening to something and they were talking about just alphabetically, he came right after Jacob Eason. and throwing, which is just so unfortunate for him, right? To come right after the guy with probably the strongest arm in the class. So with Jake Fromm, he does not have an elite arm. I saw enough on tape for him to be very good in the short to intermediate areas of the field. But does he have enough arm strength to work in the NFL and to get the ball downfield? I don't know. And so I came into the combine really liking Jake Fromm. I'm leaving it now with question marks. It doesn't mean that I'm, dropping him down to quarterback 10 or anything like that. But it's just for me I have more question marks with Jake Fromm than what I did going into it. Tags, I know you liked him too. Did you have kind of the same concerns there?
I do, and one of the things is it's almost like the stock market. When people talk about the stock market, perception is reality, okay? And when it's perceived that he has some struggles with his arm strength and can he move to the next level and make some of the throws, make all those throws? And then when you have someone like a Hall of Famer, Kurt Warner, come on the broadcast and say, what do you think about Jake Fromm? Do you have concerns about him? What do you think about him? And he starts talking about the lack of arm strength and not positive that he can make the throws that he needs to make in the NFL. That is perception, okay? And perception, we know that these NFL coaches watch these broadcasts. That happens. The GMs watch these broadcasts and they're hearing Kurt Warner talk about him. It is going to lower his stock. We saw nothing but love. We didn't talk about him because we talked about Jordan Love on the podcast, in the last podcast, saying that this guy's going to dominate the combine. It should not change your view on him because there's no mental processing going on at the combine. And all we heard was that Jordan Love is the greatest thing alive. We actually heard on that broadcast someone compare him to Patrick friggin' Mahomes. That was the worst thing. That was cringe. Stop it. Stop it. Jordan Love is not a quarter of the quarterback that Patrick Mahomes is. But Jake Fromm, unfortunately, did lose stock. He's probably going to fall into the second round, maybe even third round after that combine with some of the concerns that were around him. Now the perception has been there. And it seems like Jordan Love moved up. Jalen Hurts moved up. Even Justin Herbert actually looked better than I thought he would. Yeah. With his accuracy, he had his first throw went into the dirt, and then it was almost like he was overthinking it. He was aiming. But then he loosened up a little bit, and he looked better. But, yeah, it was for quarterbacks altogether, I feel like it's an area for me where you can hurt your stock more than you can help it. And Fromm was one of those guys that I definitely felt like he hurt it.
Yeah, Paul, do you have any thoughts there on Jake Fromm as we kind of wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, when you watched him on the on-field drills, it looked like he was putting everything he had in every single throw to try to show off that he had the arm talent. And that, I think, is something that was concerning even when you watched him on film. It was one of those things that he could be a really good game manager and do what you're asked to do, but I think that's going to be limited to a specific offense that you're willing to do that. And, he's a guy who I think will still go on day 2, but I think Tag said, probably round 3 more than round 2 now. I think there's 4 quarterbacks that are going in the top 15. I think Jacob Eason could still sneak into the round 1 as well if someone falls in love with the arm talent. But now I think Jake Fromm is now in the mix with Jalen Hurts to be the 6th quarterback taken off the board. And I could even see a team looking at Jalen Hurts' athleticism and developmental potential and say, you know what? Jalen Hurts can do different things for our team, and we could still try to develop him to be a quarterback, and his ceiling might be higher than Jake Fromm. So now I think the conversation before the combine was who's the 5th quarterback, Jake Fromm or Jacob Eason? And now I think we leave the combine, and I think it's more now, well, is Jake Fromm the 6th quarterback, or is he the 7th quarterback in terms of him or Jalen Hurts? And that's kind of, I think, the reality of the situation with Jake Fromm.
So real quick, Paul, before we close this out, so you think Jordan Love's going top 15?
Yeah, I think he's going. I think he's going in that trio of teams in the early teens that needs a quarterback. I do because to me they're looking past completely the 2019 film and his production this year, and they're looking at the 2018 film where he was much better, and he lost all his receivers, his running back, most of his O-line, most of his coaching staff, and I think they're kind of giving him a free pass, right or wrong. I did like his 2018 film a lot. He was a guy that I had on the round 1, round 2 border before the season started. Now, I will grant that his 2019 film leaves a lot to be desired.
Horrendous.
Yeah, it leaves a lot to be desired. And I think, the NFL is trying to separate, what they saw in 2018 in terms of the upside and the tools and the traits compared to what then they saw in 2019. And I think he's going to get drafted almost as if 2019 honestly didn't happen, and he's going to be drafted exclusively on the traits. But he's a guy that whoever drafts him, you know, a team like the Colts would make some sense if they go get Phillip Rivers for a couple years. Go get.
Yeah, I'm gonna round this. I'm gonna 1 second, Yates. Like, just because I feel the need. Like, so if we ignore 2019, Albert O should go like at the end of the first round, because that 4.39 or 4.49 that he ran, it's like his speed score was ridiculous for his size. His tape in 2019 sucked. I liked it in 2018, but Jordan Love, if he goes to the Colts, let's pretend that happens. He goes to the Colts at 13. He will be a quarterback to draft in fantasy football. Like, mark my words. Like, I will probably rank him maybe the highest in terms of that, because there is potential here, especially if you put him behind that offensive line. He's going to run the ball a little bit. It's nuts to think he can go top 15, but it kind of makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, with Jordan Love, the thing to keep in mind is that he has an incredibly high ceiling, which is kind of the same argument. And this is where I see the Patrick Mahomes. I'm not in any way comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. But what I'm saying is, with his college, we have to remember that Patrick Mahomes was not fantastic in college. Like, there were a lot of concerns about him coming out, and that's why we saw him fall, you know, as far as he did. And when the Chiefs traded up to get him, you know, so I think with Jordan Love, an incredibly high ceiling, but one of the lowest floors out of any quarterback in this class. You know, we could be talking about a complete bust at the position, or we could be talking about, you know, a potential top 15 quarterback in the NFL. It's just, I think it's just who Jordan Love is, and all these kind of, you know, situations and circumstances go together to try to figure out what he's going to be at the next level. So yeah, I'm interested to see where he goes. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today. Again, huge thank you to Paul Perdichizzi for coming on the show. Remember to follow him on Twitter at Paulie23NY. That's PAULIE23NY. For Mike Tagliere and Paul Perdichizzi, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Make sure to check out our featured videos as well. Also,